Hey, Curtis, we were talking in part one about media narratives and glass half full, glass half empty type of stuff that's going on. So Dallas is in the glass half full zone with media takes, right? Because everybody's so excited for the Luka piece of it and the Kyrie rehabilitation / resurgence. And the Celtics are in the glass half empty zone of, I know these guys' records, but, and there's like a yeah, but. Do you feel like this whole cycle happens faster than it used to happen? Is this like instantaneously in 12 hours, all of a sudden the glass half full, glass half empty happens?
It's probably generally true, though I think the Celtics part of it has lasted basically throughout the playoffs because there's just not that much to say.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, what's your, what was your storyline, after the Pacers lost game one and the series looked like it was going to be really fun for about 5 minutes. Well, what else was there to say? And then, Halliburton gets hurt and the only take right there is to start to just poke at the Celtics. Oh, these guys aren't that good. They haven't played anybody. Stars keep getting hurt. So I think it's almost out of boredom, if anything else.
Yeah, Russillo, Chris Ryen mentioned to me, he was like, it seems like you haven't had as much fun talking basketball during the playoffs as you did during the football season. And I was like, well, I was ready to have fun, but the East was pretty awful, right? Even like the Knicks series, which seemed like it was super fun. And then by the time we got to game 7, the Knicks are running on fumes and ESPN's doing the Stephen A show basically for the final game. And it was like, this isn't fun at all. West was a little more fun and then it kind of flamed out. But I would say if we were going to rank the playoffs, would you rank this on the lower end, Russillo, since we started doing this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, no question. My favorite series other than Minnesota-Denver is New York-Philly. I mean, I love that series.
Round one.
Loved it. And OKC-Dallas is there. As far as entertainment, we had close games with Dallas and Minnesota, but it just, I think, was like, oh, Minnesota's just not ready for this the entire time. So yeah, but it also speaks to the Boston part of it. When the season started, hey, who has the most on the line now? And it's Boston. Which team, if they don't win a title, feels like it's a disappointing season? Now, I think there's an absurd version of that where, because I was back in Boston listening to a lot of the local coverage, it's like, if they don't win, well, what if they lose game 7 at home and Doncic finds a way to get 6 points in the last minute and a half? You start sitting there going, oh, this team's super disappointing again. Of course, there's a losing scenario where you'd feel like Boston doesn't have to start questioning itself, their identity as an organization. But there's so much at stake for them because they've been lingering here now for such a long time that there was no way to enjoy it, especially once Butler, Mitchell, and Halliburton were gone. So I'm not surprised at all.
And they've spent a crazy amount of money on it. And a lot of things have broken their way. Yeah, like Curtis, we should mention you're from the great state of Texas. You followed this Mavs team.
I did.
If Dallas doesn't win the finals, I don't feel like it, I don't feel like the ramifications would be the same as the Celtics blowing this and Dallas becoming the third biggest underdog since the merger in the NBA Finals to win a title and to come down from having lost 30 games in the regular, all these beats. It would be a really bad loss for the Celtics. And for the Mavs, they'd be like, hey man, Luka, it's coming. It's going to happen. And, I think you'd quickly move forward. Right. But how's the city of Dallas treating this team?
It's been so funny because end of last year, and I still consider myself culturally a citizen of Dallas-Fort Worth in the same way you guys do Boston. Yeah. I listen to sports radio down there all the time. End of last year, everybody's pissed off about the tanking. End of last season, everybody wants Jason Kidd fired. I was listening to the Dallas radio coverage of the draft this year. Everybody pissed off when they took Derek Lively. 5 points a game at Duke, 5 rebounds. That's what we want. I mean, that was not a happy day of radio at all. So, and even till March, right? When they put Lively on the bench, put Gafford in the starting lineup, put Jones in the starting lineup, the Mavericks go 16-2, everybody just really perked up. So it's not only a happy to be there finals, there was just, again, this does not stretch back at all. This is the opposite of what Ryan's talking about with Boston. Really, just since March has it been like, maybe there's something there in this team.
Yeah, it's like the happy surprise NBA Finals team, which we don't get that often because all we do is talk basketball every day.
I don't want to hear about anybody on coaches until they can once tell me they like this coach who they think is really good on a 30-win team. Like, this guy's a really good coach, or they won 30 games. But now it's gone the other way where no one thought Kidd was any good. And it's strictly about the fact the story keeps being told over and over again on all the playoff games. He talks to the players, not as a coach, but as a player. He tells them what he would do if he played, not what they should do. And his timeouts before the timeout that you lose automatically, people are acting like he's fucking sitting there saying, I think this world, there's more going on than just a flat line on the horizon. It may be spinning. We could be on something that's shaped different. Like announcers love a couple things, and I'm well versed in this.
Well, they love a good timeout the most. A good timeout is just catnip.
But not losing the timeout, everybody knows you're going to lose. If you call that before you lose it, fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And then the other thing they love from players is when there's, say, 14 left and the shot clock is off and a guy got a really good look at the hoop and he goes, let me peel out here and waste time, run the clock and get a way worse look. Announcers fucking love that. They're like, smart. They didn't want to give the other team a possession, and he took an awful shot as opposed to the wide open one. Brilliant.
Well, the cousin of that is the 2-for-1, where somebody will jack up a 29-footer with a hand in his face with 29 seconds left on the clock. Like, 2-for-1, it's fine. It's great.
Yeah, it's like
it
a
sets
29
up a half-court shot with 24 seconds from now.
You took one of the worst shots of the game at 29 seconds. The reality is if they take a shot with 3 or 4 left on the shot clock, by the time you corral the rebound, you have like 4 seconds.
Yeah.
Like the 2-for-1, there needs to be, now Bryan's like, am I supposed to be on this podcast? There needs to be an understanding that it has to be over a certain number left in the quarter. And guys are like 2 seconds north of the shot clock going,
yeah, but there's 40 seconds left. It makes sense. 29 seconds left, maybe not as much
I think
sense.
35 is maybe
Yeah, 35 sounds great. Curtis, I mean, we knew this would go in a bunch of different directions, but the announcing during the playoffs, the studio stuff in the playoffs, the discourse we get on TV now versus the discourse we get on podcasts that are so much more hardcore and day to day. Can TV keep up anymore? And where are we going with this going forward?
I thought you were setting me up for JJ on Felger and Maz question there, but
I didn't hear that. So that got gnarly, right?
You traveled around a tad, and it's what you're talking about, these two different worlds colliding, which is a fascinating thing to me about where we are right now.
Yeah,
the NFL, it's like really pronounced because NFL studio shows still feel like the 1994 studio show that I flipped on at home, and when I had to go turn on the TV, like Phil Simms. God bless Phil Simms, sayonara. It's been a great run, but he was still doing Phil Simms on television. And, the NBA shows, you could argue maybe there's a little more there. And inside the NBA, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, is its own weather system. But we're just in this funny moment where you just have a completely different conversation about basketball in one form versus the other.
Well, and then the game telecasts feel different in some ways too, because it just feels like we're between these two worlds where you can hear it with the JJ Doris Breen telecast where they're trying to be really sophisticated at certain times, right? And they're trying to throw numbers at us and strategy and stuff that's a little closer to the JJ side. But then there'll be somebody goes up by 20. And then it's like, what I kind of needed here was Van Gundy just babbling about some story in the 99 Knicks and some guys having a good time and it feeling like they're hanging out and having a podcast. And it's that balance. Like it feels like on TV, the balance, they're really having a trouble trying to figure out what that balance is. Because on the one hand, what's your servant when you're doing these daily TV shows? It's like the video clip. Was there a good headline? Did you grab people with that 2 minutes, right? It's Mike Greenberg showing the shot of Jason Tatum. Was he happy for Jaylen Brown when he got the finals MVP? I don't know. What did you think? And now we start going around the circle. So they're doing that stuff, but then they're also trying to educate you about basketball. Are you happy with this stuff at this point, Russillo? Where are you?
I know it's not for me. And I've learned this lesson over the last few years that I think the drama, look, I'll actually defend First Take here. The clip that made the rounds was during the playoffs, and then everybody screen grabbed it. Could Stephen A score a point against LeBron James 1-on-1? All right. How long's First Take? Is it 2 hours? Is it 3 hours?
They're having fun with that. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So the point is, it's like a really easy target to go, oh, look at these guys, and there's all these other amazing stories, and it makes the rounds. There's also a lot of just I know I used to have it too, where I'd watch certain shows and being like, it's amazing to think like I'm not allowed to be on that show because I don't fit into a perfect like cookie cutter deal. And it was something I had an issue with for a long time, probably too long. I remember Dan Patrick saying to me, like, what's wrong with you? Why do you think you would be on that? If you don't angle to be an anchor and host these shows, you're never going to be on those shows. Like, you're basically an idiot for thinking that you can be on it. Even though I think the rules of that have been stretched quite a bit with people in non-traditional backgrounds being on opinion shows covering some of the major sports.
Well, they need more bodies.
Right. I no longer care about it now. I've gotten over that part of it. But so when I watch those shows, I know that they're not necessarily for me, but I really think that we get the media coverage and we get the shows that we actually want, and no one wants to admit that we click on the dumb shit. Okay? If I were being totally transparent of like, I can't believe I clicked on this story, but it was a well-crafted headline. It was a little vague. I had to know the fucking answer. I had to know if Maury had the results and that guy was the dad. Like inherently, right. I think we all, as educated as you may find yourself, as you age and try to angle your interest in more refined things, sometimes we still want to know if that guy's the fucking dad. And that's a lot of the sports coverage. And I think it's okay. And the reason this is programmed that way is because that's what we want. Whether it's the broadcast teams, whether it's the big names of the guy that just retired, because if you don't know who that person is, you're like, who's that guy? And that's how they program these things. And it's also the way they still structure. We could go over all these different topics and questions, be like, that show's stupid, or this is a dumb question, or whatever. I think the audience actually always wants this stuff. And I've come to that epiphany years ago, and I repeat it probably too often.
To me, what's even more interesting is the way they've gone the opposite direction. So when you're watching ESPN's number one team, and JJ Redick is really trying to get some X's and O's basketball into a telecast, which, by the way, is really hard in a basketball game because you don't have much time to talk, and really, really hard when you have a 3-person booth and there's not enough time really for either analyst to get their stuff in there. You know, he's like, that's a peel screen. And I'm sitting there, somebody who loves basketball but doesn't engage with it like you guys do, going, so peel screen, whoop, Google, let me figure out what that is real quick. And, you know, again, that's about, and he's a newish announcer. Saw Greg Olson do a little bit of this when he first started. And then he started doing like, you know what, I'm going to give you the X's and O's, but I'm just actually going to throw away all the terminology and explain to you what happened on a play. Like we don't need terms. That doesn't really help anybody here. People that know what a peel screen is are going to recognize it anyway. Let's just do terminology here. But they've tried to go the other way. It feels like a little bit on that main ESPN telecast.
You know, the Greg Olson thing's an interesting comparison because I remember that first year you wrote about it after the fact. You wrote a really good piece about Olson, how he figured out he almost had too much information.
Yes.
And he had to figure out every play. I have 5 things to say. Let me just figure out, this is the whole conceit of your piece. Let me just figure out the best of these 5 things. And that's what I'll say. And I do feel a little about that with JJ, because obviously he's an incredibly smart basketball guy and you can hear in the pod. But when you're doing the TV and the games and you're trying to also appeal to people who are casual fans or kind of fair weather fans, and how do you shove the basketball down their throat without shoving it down their throat? You know, I guess my question with basketball is when it's flying back and forth like that, how much do we need? You know, it's almost like the Summerall style. Is it better to have a little less? Does sometimes I don't really know what I want. I know I haven't been completely happy with a broadcast in a while. And I don't really know what I want from it, Russillo. I guess because I'm watching the game, like they have all these alt casts. I could just tell you I've never watched an alt cast for basketball ever.
Same.
I'm just not interested. I want to hear the announcers and I want to hear the crowd. And I don't really want to be entertained by these people. Like I actually want to watch the game. But I'm sure there's an audience for that stuff too. What do you want from it?
Man, that's a tough answer because like I think JJ's at his best when he's pointing out what he feels. Like there were certain moments I'd say in some of the Celtics games against the Pacers, he's like, okay, it is noticeable that the defensive energy is cranked up here. And he's right there and he's watching it. And it's such a simple thing, but I don't know that many color people are that good at pointing that out immediately. They may see a block and play the results of, the defensive intensity, but it was just the activity, the movement, fighting over screens, contesting more. And he was 100% right. It wasn't like he was seeing it and it wasn't happening. But then I think it's really tough because it's their first year together with this group. And whatever you thought of the previous regime with Van Gundy and Jackson and Breen, they'd been around for so long that they knew each other's beats really well. And I actually liked it when it got a little topical. I like when there's a slow moment in a game where it can be,
they start just talking about shit. Yeah.
Like, hey, what's going on? I actually, maybe it's because of the podcasting thing with me. I liked it. So when people say, oh, great, Saturday night's game turns into a podcast again. Well, if the game sucks, great. Like I was into it. I was watching the UFC last night. So Anik, Rogan, DC, they are so good, but the sport allows you to have these moments where Strickland is kind of feeling himself out, feeling out the opponent. So there's not constant action. And yet they're talking about Costa and just kind of where he's at in his career. And you're getting all this awesome backstory and then making that part of the observation and the actual call of the fight. And then these peak energy moments when the action is being matched by how the announcers. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, this is a brilliant broadcast of these fights. And these three guys are so good. But I also think the sport allows for it a little bit more. Where Bryan's point on the basketball, there's probably no perfect formula, but you can always tell, Bryan, when somebody shows up with way too much prep. Yes. And when that happens, it's usually newer people that want to prove their worth. And the most important thing you can ever learn in the broadcasting, like somebody who had to do play-by-play 20-something years ago, way too much prep, talked way too much, wasn't secure, trying to prove myself. And even somebody who has a 10-year career in the NBA, the first time they get that position, you can tell when it's like, okay, it's just not comfortable and they're trying to prove that they belong here. Or then you have the other side of the guy that's like, you wanted me to do prep? Well, I just played, like, I don't need to.
What you said about the UFC thing, I think that's such a good point. I think those guys are great together. And in the Strickland Costa fight last night, Rogan was on it early. He was like, I don't like this pace for him. He's moving backwards. Strickland's he's moving forward. He's making him expend a lot of energy. And I don't think Costa's ready for this. I think by the fourth, fifth rounds, then they start talking about, did he make a mistake making this fight 5 rounds instead of 3? They were having all these conversations and Strickland hadn't even really taken hold of the fight yet. And then when it started happening in the 3rd and 4th round, because I was watching with my son, and my son was like, this is the right conversation. Like, this is like, I don't think Costa, I don't know why he didn't do 3 rounds. And they were just tapping into shit. The point is with basketball, Bryan, it's so back and forth and so fast. It would be really hard to explore the studio space like that,
Yeah, it's funny, and I know I'm preaching the choir here, Bill, but it's really weird that we've decided that every major basketball game in the United States needs 3 announcers. These are all good announcers, so I'm not killing anybody here. But Turner, 3 announcers for the conference finals. ESPN, 3 announcers for all the big games. The Final Four, 3 announcers. There's just not that much time, and again, it's not a shot at anybody so much. It's just like you have this tiny window where you can talk about something. It's a play-by-play announcer sport. So when you have 2 analysts and they're both trying to get their stuff in there, and then inevitably they start talking to each other, one of them makes a point, the other person says, I agree. And I'm like, okay, yeah, thanks. Wanted to know what the other person thought of that point as we, swing down the court the other way. It's too crowded to me. It just is absolutely too crowded.
There's also something else I've noticed with Doris is that she's wants to be so respectful of JJ because of his career and that he just finished up playing and he's still very connected to so many players that it's almost like she doesn't want JJ to feel that she's getting in her way, but then in a way it's almost fucking her up a little bit. And I don't know if it's not even about her ability because we know how great she can be, but I think it's tough to be like, hey, new group finals, figure it out. And she's doing something that's actually, it's commendable because I think she's being incredibly gracious to JJ, but she's not getting to be the best version of herself because I think she wants him to flourish. And that's what I've noticed.
So I remember writing about this. With the first one, I had my Digital City Boston column. One of those finals, Doug Collins was doing the games. And then they added Isaiah. I think it was Isaiah or Magic. It was one of them.
It started with Isaiah, and then they hired Doug Collins, I think, because of
that's right. It was the three of them. And one of the tips,
I love that he knew that immediately.
One of the tips you can look at when you know the threesome hasn't clicked is they'll come out of timeouts or even when they're talking and they'll say each other's names to try to make it seem like their balls moving around. And it'll be like, right? And Bryan, that's what has to happen when you're protecting the rim. That's right, Bill. That is what has to happen. And then they go and it's just like, oh, this isn't working. And I thought Van Gundy and Jackson and Breen, they kind of went sideways a little bit for me the last couple of years, but mainly because Jackson was out of the league too long. And I like hearing at least one person on the broadcast who's either coached or played against the guys that I'm watching within the last couple of years, because I think that's the biggest asset. But one of the things that was good about them was it really sounded like those guys went to dinner together, they hung out together, they might vacation together. And then when they were doing the game, you felt that camaraderie and that chemistry. And I do think that's important. It's a really hard thing to build. And it's a really hard thing to build in 4 or 5 months, especially like I've announced a couple NBA games and it goes so much faster than you realize. Like it's like, oh my God, we're at the 7-minute timeout. Like I've made 2 points. And so when you have a third person there, it's just flying by and then they're talking in your ear and it's really choppy and weird. So you got to rely on that chemistry. But Bryan, your original point, I don't know why it's not just 2 people. I don't know how we got to 3. I don't know who made the decision. I don't know when people looked at each other. Like even TNT in the conference finals, they're like, Stan Van Gundy, Reggie Miller, they've never worked together all year. These are our guys. And they're with Kevin Harlan. It's like, just pick one. Why not?
They did it last year too. It was the same thing. And by the way, as people have looked at the new crews, I've seen some strange new respect for Mark Jackson coming up in a few places.
Comeback.
Hey, Mark, we had some issues with Mark Jackson, but I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I'm out.
Right.
I'm all good. Thank you very much for going to that one. We're fine. Yeah.
I don't know that we've ever had this depth of play-by-play guys. It's unbelievable how many play-by-play guys across all sports and all networks where I go, this is a loaded era. Better than the 90s?
No, it's a little like what happened with the NBA where the older guys are still really good, but then this new crop of dudes came in. Like they said, NBC for the Olympics is going to have Noah Eagle and Dwayne Wade, just the 2 of them. I'm like, that sounds great. No Eagle, Dwayne Wade, no third person that we're awkwardly like pushing in some way, and they'll just call the game. The games will have certain flows. But this goes back to a topic that we've talked about over and over again. It's like, I don't know why TV producers and the people who oversee this stuff can't stay out of their own way sometimes. And we saw this with Inside the NBA, and Russillo and I talked about it last week, where it's just like we just were doing this victory lap of what an awesome show this has been for us for 20 plus years. And then over and over again, they have to put a 5th guy in when the stakes get bigger. This happened with the ESPN's women's basketball team during the college tournament. Everyone was like, this 3-person team they have is great. Like it was really jumped out. It was like, this is awesome. And then when we got to the Final Four, what happens? All of a sudden, it's a 5-person thing. It's like these guys, they can't help themselves, the people that oversee it. It's like they almost want to feel like they did something. So their boss is like, what are we doing for the Final Four? We're going to add Don Staley. Great. That sounds good. It's like, you know what? You had a really good team already. Why did they do this, Curtis?
It's really strange. And the thing I hate about it, I think I saw this. It had definitely happened with Draymond. Heard you guys talking about this, but also with CP3 on ESPN, which is everything then has to be about the new guy.
Yes.
So they're going to like, hey, Chris, when you
I liked
were
it with
playing
Chris, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah,
Chris was good.
Sorry. When you were playing in the playoffs and you were in a high leverage situation, when you were feeling pressure, that was like, first of all, I was like, who wrote this question? Thank you very much. But everything is then about his playoff career. And I'm like, you're an interesting guy. I want to hear you talk. That's cool. But this is not about you right now. We've actually got really, really big basketball in front of us. And the conversation should be about that. And I hate when that happens. In addition to, as you say, a producer getting in the way and just needing to add something for the most important basketball games of the year that we didn't need, then it always becomes about the new guy because they start asking him about his career. And I'm just like, I don't want this.
When the 5-person studio show, we just have 50 plus years of evidence that it fails. It fails for the same reason. I just did a podcast I don't want to step on for rewatchables where we talked about the power of foursomes and four people when you go to dinner. 4 people is always the best number. 4 people is always the best number for a studio show. There's just certain things where golf, foursome is much better than playing with 3 people, than one person's by themselves in a cart. The 4 just works, and I don't know why they would mess with that as the stakes get bigger and the audience gets bigger. That's when they add the 5th person. I actually wanted to hear from Chris Paul. It was interesting, but at that point, you just have to bump one of the people on the show. Like, just pick one. Somebody's got to go. What were we going to say, Russillo?
Well, I have like specific Curtis questions on just understanding some of this stuff, in that we keep like seeing these obits for inside the NBA, and it's coming back next year.
It's
true.
We think. Okay,
Well,
all right, why don't you two guys talk this out? Because I don't know.
So it is. We have another year left on the NBA rights deal. So inside the NBA,
technically we do, yes.
Yeah. So NBA will. The plan is that will be on Turner next year.
But
okay,
what was the time? What was it? College football. What was the one where they lost it, and then the people just said, with a year left to go, "Fuck it, just take it now."
The SEC CBS thing.
No, but CBS held on to it for that extra year. They wanted that last year.
Didn't ESPN try to buy the last year or something?
I thought there was one where they just said, "Screw it, just take it now."
Thursday Night Football went from Fox to Amazon a year early. That might be what you're talking about.
Yes, that's what it is. I'm prepared for anything, because it's, to me, so crazy that Warner didn't keep the NBA to begin with, and watching them for the last month pretend that they're still in this, and we have the right to match. It's like, this was done a month ago. This is where I went on the town and we did the whole thing. This was done. They lost it. And now the reporting that's come out since about, I think Lucas Shaw was the first one to report. The NBA was like, give us 2-3 and you have it during the exclusive period. Yeah. And Warner's like, nope, 2-1. You're taking games away from us. And they're like, okay, cool. And they left and immediately got 2.5 per year from NBC, and that's it. And they're going to lose it. And so when I think like how badly that was botched, I just like, would it surprise me if they're like, fuck it, take this off our hands a year early and we'll redistribute the money somewhere else and go after like UFC or whatever they like. I'm prepared for anything. The lame duck season for coaching, for TV properties, it always gets a little weird. I'm not ruling it out, is my point.
I hear you. It is cheaper this year than the money we're talking about. I mean, it's significantly cheaper. So they have a cheap year, just like CBS just did with the SEC. Also, if your existential fear at Turner is that cable operators are going to be like, hey, we don't need you anymore because there's nothing on your network, why would you want to speed up that process? Surely you'd want to give yourself an extra year of cover while you figure out what are we going to put on TNT to make sure this is still a viable cable network, at least as viable as any cable network.
What if you could get twice as much money than what you're paying to get rid of it a year early?
Maybe, and your company has a lot of debt like Warner Brothers does. Is this Media Reporter Bill the one that broke the news about Turner being out? Because I want to know who I'm talking to here.
No, it's not Media Reporter Bill. This is just, I'm prepared for anything.
Great question by a reporter, though.
Great job by Bryan.
Right.
No, I'm prepared for anything, Bill, because when it came out that for 2-3 they could have locked down the NBA and they just decided not to, that makes me think you are making decisions solely for money at this point. And if you're making decisions solely for money, would you pedal off the last year of your deal for twice as much to NBC and just say, take this a year early, give us money?
Okay.
It's not out of the realm for me.
Okay. So when Skipper did the decade-long deal for the rights in the mid-teens, it was immediately met with like, are you out of your mind?
Right.
You tripled it. And it turned out that he was totally right, deserves all the credit, nailed it, because I'll never forget my first meeting ever with him. It was, hey, you've been on the air a bunch of years. Finally, probably worth getting to know you for 60 minutes. And then he kind of like laid out his philosophy of live rights and all of these things. And I just remember going, okay, I'll never look at this the same way because this guy spent this much time explaining this shit to me. And now I get, and you never knew with Skipper, it's like, does he want me as one of the people that's on the air at the time, all like at ESPN? Does he want me hearing his side of it so that then I leave that meeting going, you know who's a genius is this John Skipper. Have you met him? So
Really knows the sports rights.
Yeah, right. So I always thought there was a little bit of that in there, but clearly his call was the right call long-term on the rights part of it. But there's also all of the ESPN programming that needs to be filled to be in the relationships with it. Then there's also like different weird stuff with SportsCenter that I never knew about, that when you have the rights, then that means you can also show the replays in a way where the NFL had some real restrictions. It's like if you're not in business with them, then it limits all these other things you can do with repurposing any of the broadcast stuff. So the reason I'm even setting this up, and I'm going to need another second here. I remember the Nets were being purchased. Bruce Ratner was doing the big real estate deal, and it may even been a Grantland piece. Okay, it was one of those awesome long form pieces. I think that's where I read
remember those?
Yeah, they were awesome. And Ratner said something I'm sure other owners hated, because he was basically putting this undetermined number of value on what a franchise was. Like, we can come up with what it's worth, money in, money out, but this is a painting. This is something I can say that I own. And I'm one of the few people in the world that has one of these things. And it's like the worst argument ever for ownership when it comes to like CBA stuff with players. And the reason I try to set these two things up here, which I'm taking too long doing, is that I don't know where the numbers can keep going. But clearly there's something where it's worth beyond what it is for just the money in, money out of what you're selling the commercials for on these broadcasts. That if you're not in business with one of them, then you're not really serious, that you're not a real station, that you don't have Pat Summerall giving you a promo, a house of buggin' as you're coming back from commercial right before a kickoff after a touchdown. That there have to be all these other baked in values that the TV people understand as the numbers continue to go up in a way that no one can ever shoot too high of a projection for.
You agree?
Completely agree. Thank you for the House of Buggin', all new Fox,
and
8:30.
then Malcolm in the middle.
No, but I think you're right. And look, David Zaslav, the guy running Warner Bros. Discovery, was sitting courtside with the Knicks, right, for all those games. So surely he, of all people, should realize that there is something about being in business with the NBA. I think the question that's interesting there is, and it goes back to that, what you said about Skipper, did we think the NBA was necessarily on this tier, right? Like, that is something I feel that's happened. All three of us probably heard rumors throughout this process with the NBA media rights that this number was going to come in much lower than it's actually going to come in at, that maybe Bill was out, but maybe this number wouldn't be 3 times over $7 billion a year. It wouldn't quite get to that moment. I don't know. So
look, just to jump in though, when guys started selling their teams, I was like, wait, what's happening here?
The Cuban
thing. That was the right.
Wow.
So it was sort of odd that like the TV rumors that were coming out, like, and I don't know if it was a Boris thing where they throw out such an absurd number that when you pay a few billion, you feel like you're actually getting a deal based on the earliest projections of what the rights were going to cost. But then when you had multiple teams going through turnover and then rumors of like a couple other ones that we keep hearing about being like local, younger or older owners, local, like they're going to have to sell out, like the money's too much now. I was starting to believe that the number was going to come in at a number that was really disappointing, and that obviously didn't happen. So keep going, Bryan.
No. And I just think the NFL was always in that we want to be in, this is our painting. We want to be in business with these guys. It always has value. The NBA was another tier lower, right? But now you look at these numbers and it's, Amazon wants to be in that business. So who doesn't want to be in that business?
Yeah. The biggest thing, you brought up Skipper 10 years ago. There were less suitors 10 years ago, right? It was always going to be ESPN and TNT. There was no like renegade third person that was going to come in over the top rope. So there were some thoughts, maybe FS1, maybe Fox.
Yeah, Fox floats around.
NBC wasn't in there because they had just spent a shitload on football. And you kind of always knew where it was going with the two. This time around was different because you had way more suitors, and Apple never even got involved, which I think was a surprise even to a lot of people that were at Apple. I think Apple thought the MLS and some of the other stuff they were on the sports side was a gateway to them getting in hard in the NBA. But I think the big thing that I think Warner missed on, because I'm not positive they wanted to lose the NBA. I think they're struggling for money big time. I don't think they saw the NBC thing coming. I think John Arand has a theory in this that I think he's right. The Brian Roberts, the guy who runs Comcast, there was always a feeling with him that he's the guy in your fantasy draft. Matt Bell and I talked about this on his pod, that he's the guy in your fantasy draft who drives up the prices on like the receivers. And he's like 51 for Jamar Chase. You're like, fuck, 52. And then he backs out. And so all of a sudden you have Jamar Chase at 52. And you're like, fuck, he did it to me again. I should have known. And I think they felt like NBC wasn't a serious suitor for it. And it turns out they were. And they just missed it. And NBC was willing to go. Everyone knew Amazon was coming in. Everyone knew ESPN wanted to keep it. So you have 3 partners, not 2. They were able to split the games and the packages and all this shit up so that they end up getting to that $7 billion figure. To me, this is why they waited on expansion, because I think deep down they knew this was sitting there. And I think the owners were like, if we're going to expand, you got to wait till after the media deal, because then we'll actually know what we're splitting up. But to me, it's just a miscalculation by Zaslav. I don't think he saw the NBC thing coming. I think he saw Amazon. I don't think he saw NBC. There's a flip side though, Bryan, where maybe he wanted to lose it all along.
Maybe. I mean,
and it's a lot of money. And what Russillo's laying out about, it's a little bit of a vanity purchase. Like basically you're hoping to break even, but it lifts up all these other parts of what you're doing. And if you're trying to cut costs left and right, maybe you don't need a vanity purchase, right?
By the way, it's a ton of money. And I don't pretend to be an expert, in every part of corporate finance, but you're paying $2.5 billion or more for the old Turner package, which is not as good as Turner's old package.
Yeah, it's a worse package. Plus, it's all that money, plus all the production stuff, plus the salaries of everybody that works for you.
And
so
the ratings.
It's more than money.
Which is hilarious, because like I've thought about this where, okay, ratings are down. Ratings continue. Like it's kind of hard to package the ratings in a way where you don't see some kind of decline. It's just a matter of how extreme you want to believe the decline is there, or how much you would say, well, with new technology and all this stuff, like you can't look at these numbers anymore. Okay, well, it appears that the buyers weren't as concerned about those numbers, or maybe it just gets back to the live audience argument where it's like the traditional number can be down, but if the percentage of live audience continues to go up based on other options, then it's still just as valuable. Like this isn't a great analogy, but like the worst town still has to have the best house. And with this, you can say, well, where were your ratings 5-10 years ago? It's like, okay, but that's actually irrelevant because there isn't something else that provides this much inventory that still is going to have these moments, which I also think was a big part of Silver wanting to model some of the stuff for like more event moments. And that's why I think college basketball has just basically waved the flag and gone, we at least have our moment that matters for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Baseball postseason has been an incredible product now for a bunch of years, except for the 1 year where like half the teams got in. But the baseball postseason is still one of my favorite things, but that might be their NCAA tournament through all the other inventory that you're sifting through going, this is just never, there's not going to be a world where it exists that this is as important as it used to be.
Well, and that baseball package is coming up down the road where it's the regular season versus the playoffs is, at least with basketball, you can throw stars in the commercials and be like, tonight, Anthony Edwards against Luka Doncic, Friday night here on Amazon or whatever.
Right.
Baseball, you can't really do it. You just can't.
Okay. So I want to stay on the splitting this part up because once you got done going through the NFL part of it, I'm like, where, like, how many of you have canceled your Peacock sub? So I'm sitting there going, like, they are chopping it up and taking it to the street. Now, does that mean that the product is weaker? Is this potentially a bad long-term plan to have everybody confused where the most valuable product in live television is? Or is it just, well, we'll worry about that on the next one, because if this many different people want to pay us a combined total that outweighs just being partnered up with just 2 providers, like I think the NFL and clearly the NBA, that seems to be the league model right now. And I'm always wondering 5 years from now, if some team or league goes, more so the league than any specific team, is like, that was stupid. Like the product was all over the place.
Well, don't you think, Bryan, don't you feel like a piece of this is going to be the 2 league cable channels, the NFL Network and NBA TV, basically taking the games that were on those because they established those channels to try to get the rights fees. But eventually those channels are going to become ghost ships, like what happened to ESPN Classic in the 2000s. You take the games that were on those channels and you start selling them off as one-offs or five-offs or whatever, and you just make way more money that way. I feel like that's what's going to happen. You disagree?
No, I think that's part of it. And to Ryan, the flip side of Ryan's point is if you chop it up more ways, you get more people promoting the NBA. So all of a sudden you have Amazon promoting the NBA. We know you will take either Amazon or Netflix or hopefully both. The NFL's gotten both. NBA's working on it, right? They're in with Amazon. You get NBC, which gets a bunch of your games off cable, which has been a big deal. You can go find the quotes from David Stern 20 years ago going, we need to put our games on cable because cable is the future. We need to get them off broadcast. We've now come all the way back around. We're taking them off cable and putting them on broadcast. But I do think there is a little bit of an NFL issue here, right? I mean, the NFL carved it up as much as humanly possible. And then it's like, whoa, look at all these Jet games. Look at all these Russell Wilson games. This sucks. These aren't great nights. And there will be nights like that in the NBA for sure under the new agreement.
So talking about this big NBA package, I thought a piece of this, because they're getting so much more money than I think all of us, to get to $7+ billion for these packages is pretty nuts. And I was thinking, this sounds like the perfect time to cut back now to 72 games or 76 games, something like that. And the NBA is like, nope, it's still going to be 82. NFL, same thing. Oh, you're making way more money on these one-off games. Sounds like the perfect time maybe to drop the 18 games thing, right? Because that'll be terrible. Player safety. Literally nobody wants it. All of us love football. Nobody wants an 18-game schedule. They're going to do it. I don't know where any of this ends. Because you could tell me, is it more realistic for the NBA to add regular season games or lose them? And I gotta say, like, I could see them going, when they have the two expansion teams, going to like 86 games instead of 82 versus going backwards the other way. These guys, they're just addicted to the cash and the money and how much they can make from it. It's never about what's good for the league. Russillo, the 18-game NFL schedule, is there a bigger money grab you've ever heard of?
Well, no, I don't. I'm not surprised by any of this stuff. Like the baseball argument I always hear, like, okay, so you don't watch baseball now because the season's too long. So if they cut it to 140 or 132, you're going to start watching? Well, of course you're not. You've already decided you're out of it. So if I'm a baseball owner, it'd be like, stop bringing it up.
Yeah,
we like parking
we're going to 200
revenue.
games.
We're selling hot dogs. Shirts are $60 now in the stadium. So guess what? And we're providing jobs. So it's not happening. Stop asking. I mean, the basketball fascination with a shorter season from all the basketball writers is like, find a new fucking topic.
I know.
It's not happening.
I include myself. It's
right?
not going to happen. It's
and
never happening.
There's basketball people that I've talked to. Like, I agree with your premise, Bill. I think the 72 game thing, I've seen it all mapped out. Like, hey, great idea. It's not happening. This is not going in that direction. Every single decision. And I don't know. I mean, everybody that works like the high level of corporate America, how would you do in a meeting? It's like, okay, what are we planning on doing? Well, let's lay out the game plan for this year. Hey, let's not make every dollar available to us. Let's cut back because of just vibes. Let's not try to make every last single dollar for shareholders and the people that have invested in this company. So the only difference is this all plays out publicly. There's a different emotional attachment to it. But the NFL owners, with their track record of the last 10 years, I mean, they make the NBA owners seem like the Peace Corps. So there's nothing the NFL owners can do anymore that would ever surprise me about how much available cash they're going to go after. And the consumer, as we talked about with like your decisions with what you do and what you click on and the different shows and segments that you guiltily watch. I think it's the same thing with football. Is they're like, we'd rather go too far with this and realize when we've made the mistake than potentially leave anything on the table. And that's what I think the NFL does with the way they operate.
What do you think, Bryan?
It's what everybody does. I mean, we decided in my lifetime that 64 teams was not enough to crown a college basketball champion.
God.
64 wasn't enough.
We haven't even talked about college football. Like when you think about what college football has done to their sport in such a massive amount of times, it looks like the NFL stuck in the 50s.
Yeah. Oh, I know. And college football playoffs going to be a month long this year. It's going to last.
I talked to a guy last night. He's like, I played at Cal. He's like, we're in the ACC. He's like, I forgot again. I forgot twice that we're in the ACC.
Everything grows. I mean, we created
Cal's in the ACC?
Yeah.
Breaking news for Bill.
Jesus, this is why I feel great about not following college sports. Yeah, I guess if you're comparing NBA or NFL to college sports, you're feeling great. You're doing 100 times better. What happens to college sports? Do we just end up with like 32 major programs and that's it?
Well, I think we're going to have it.
Everybody else is Div 3?
Right. It'll go to some extreme where, you think the NFL owners, you have school presidents with no governing body just deciding to do whatever they want to do, and they get on the phone, and then all of a sudden you have Cal and the ACC because of all these other dominoes that have fallen. But I don't care how outdated I sound. I don't care how old I sound. I think there is a line which you could pass in the structure of some of these decisions that are made where you're like, hey, we went too far. It's like the Tebow coverage at ESPN. They were like, we can't get enough of it. It does numbers. The data backs it up. Tebow. And I was like, I think everybody's fucking sick of this Tebow topic. I think people are pretty sick of it. And like, nope, keep doing it. And the play there was, we will do it until we've made a mistake doing it too much instead of not doing it enough, which is basically what I just said about the money part of it. So when I look at college football, I don't think they give a shit about any of it anymore. And there may be this super league. And then I'd like to think there'll be some correction 10 years after that happens. It was like, what was kind of fun? Where geographically and culturally, it felt like there was 10 to 12 schools that all kind of matched what it was like to be from that part of the country. I miss that. And that's what I loved about college football. And that's what I hate about what's happening.
Curtis is sad. Curtis loves college football. What conference is Texas in? Are you in like the Patriot League now?
I will say I'm sad, but on the other hand, I looked at Texas' schedule the other day. It's like, wow, we're playing Georgia this year, playing Florida. We got two of our old rivals back, Arkansas and A&M. We're playing at Michigan at the beginning of the season. I'm like, that sounds like the Super League is here. And, I totally co-sign everything Ryan just said, but also I'm looking forward to all those games. It's going to be awesome.
Can we talk about Inside the NBA?
Yes. I really want to talk about this.
You just wrote about this. You wrote about Barkley and the theory of people who publicly negotiate their contracts, which is a new trend that we're seeing, which I'm surprised people are interested in. Barkley seems pissed off more than anything. I think he was led to believe that they were keeping it, and now he's looking at all these people, and he's talked about it. He's looking at all these people he's worked with for the last 2 decades, and I just think he felt like this was going to be a situation I'm just going to keep going. And now all of a sudden, this person he barely knows is taking basketball away. What happens to the show going forward? What happens to Barkley? Does it stay together? What are your instincts?
So he was going to keep going, except every 3 or 4 years he would say, I'm going to retire.
Yeah.
And then Turner would come by and be like, well, here is a huge new contract not to retire. So please don't retire. So he's going to do that. But it's funny to me because I think we all love Inside so much, and I'm one of these people that we think the only way these TV friends would ever break up is if some asshole executive breaks them up. That's the only way. If you actually listen to what Charles Barkley says and has done going back to 2 years ago when he shopped himself to live golf and to possibly leave Turner. We all kind of memory hold that one, right? It's like, if live golf gets me a huge payday, I'm just going to have to go. And that's just the way it is. If you listen to what he says, his whole thing has been like, I want to make a great deal for myself. And I don't begrudge him that at all. He is great at what he does. He is the biggest star on that program. He has more worth and more leverage than everybody on that program combined, right? So he can go make the big deal he wants. So to me, the question about Inside going forward is, what is Charles Barkley's interest in keeping the band together? He's the guy it's not going to be Amazon saying, hey, we want everybody. It's going to be Amazon or somebody going to Charles Barkley and say, what's important to you? Is it what's important to you that you get the absolute best deal? Or is it important to you that we bring everybody with you? That's what you want. And to me, he holds this whole thing in his hands because he's that big of a star.
Well, the one thing that seems pretty certain is that Ernie's going to retire with Turner because he's been there forever. And, he's at a later stage of his career and he's under contract with them. He's doing other stuff with them. And it seems like it's a super important thing for him. But I also wouldn't be surprised by anything. It also might be a good career move for Barkley to branch out and be with a different group of people. He's been what's the difference between 23 years, 17 years, 12? Once you get past like 10, 12 years of everybody together, maybe it is an interesting career thing for him. On the other hand, he just tried a career move with that Gayle King show, and that thing lasted, 10 weeks. So sometimes when you're a part of something special, maybe you try to keep that. How do you see it playing out, Russillo?
Well, everybody knows he's my favorite athlete of all time, and probably, one of the coolest things is getting to know him over the years and having him on. But when I had him on, I think it was just a year ago when I was in Chicago for the Combine. I think it was a year ago. It could have been 2 years ago. He was basically telling me he wasn't going to do this much longer. And Curtis lays it out perfectly, the timeline in this piece that's up on the Ringer now. And I would say the lesson that I think is the most correct lesson I've ever learned in this business is if you're younger and there's an older guy that's on the air and a manager says, hey, that guy's probably not going to re-sign after this year. He's going to call it quits. It's the most untrue thing in any profession. That guy never goes anywhere. He just keeps re-signing because think about his life. Like, hey, do you want to make another $20 million next year working? Granted, he works more than 1 day a week when you factor in all the NCAA tournament stuff that they do. But I'm always fascinated by Barkley. Like, I have a Barkley theory that if you're just yourself long enough, once you get through the rough patches, then everybody catches up to you. And then you no longer have to be anybody else. Like, you don't have to worry about what you say. Like, if you say things that rub people the wrong way long enough and you haven't lost your job on the air, you can then just survive forever. And everybody
That's the Howard Stern
accepts.
Theory. Yeah, Howard Stern.
Really,
you pass a point where you just get to say whatever you want. It's okay.
Like him saying before the Western Conference Finals, like, I haven't been in Minneapolis in 20 years. They're like, dude, you were here. Curtis puts it in. Curtis, speak for your column because I don't want to quote it. But
he was there 5 years ago, and his alma mater, Auburn, was playing in the Final Four. So it seems sort of not like a thing you would forget.
He must not have had a great weekend.
People love Barkley, and nobody's going to call him out.
No, it does, and it doesn't matter, right? Like, that's the whole thing.
All right, but here's I think this is a good connection to what we've been talking about with every last dollar and where do the TV rights keep going and all this stuff. We've seen massive single contracts for people, whether it's the Aikman-Buck deal, the Brady deal, like new levels where when you thought you were making like a couple $1,000,000 for one of these jobs, you're like, I'm killing it and I'm having a great life. I think the peak content people have completely reset the market at the higher ends. Like, where does this keep going? Where, like, do you ever have anybody in your world that talks to you kind of off the record? I don't even know if you can share this with us, where it's the person's becoming the vanity hire, where you may not even be able to figure out how to recoup all of that money. Like, is there a number where Barkley isn't actually worth it?
Yeah. I mean, I think I hear that from people in the business all the time, especially from a kind of person that's the executive, but not the executive running the place. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly at ESPN, right? Like Jimmy Pitaro's decided this is the strategy, right? There were clearly people, let us say at the executive level at ESPN, and we're like, oh, is that the strategy? Are we really going in on 1, 2, 3, 4 here? Is that it? So yeah, all the time. And look, if ESPN were to hire Barkley and put him on the pregame show, you're really going to have $40 million a year in salaries on the NBA pregame show because Stephen A's not going anywhere.
Especially a show that they've proven they don't really care about because they have 2 minute segments at halftime. Like,
here's what I would say to Pitaro: let him be on the air for a little while. Like, the great,
if you're going to hire him, have him.
The greatness of the TNT studio show, and by the way, I don't even know what the ratings are. Everybody raves about it. What are the actual ratings? But they come back and they give them the freedom to actually have real fucking conversations. There's a looseness to that, a lack of structure, because you can't have structure with those guys. Those guys would revolt against structure. And then I see these shows try to do it. It's like, what are you doing? You don't even have this. You're not allowing your on-air people to even have the same taste of real estate as these guys.
That's what when I was doing the studio show, that was always what I was talking to Curtis about. I was like, this finally makes sense to me. We're coming out of halftime in like a game 7 of, some series final, and you have 2.5 minutes to talk. Like you were saying this on ESPN, and they had Chris Paul there. They had 5 people at a halftime show, and it was like 2 minutes and 10 seconds. And Stephen A was one of the people. So, he's going to go for at least a minute, and then they got to work Chris Paul in. So you might as well take the other 2. Poor Bob Myers. I don't know if his usage rate was too high. I went. I look back. I wrote about Inside the NBA in spring of 2002 for Page 2. It was the first year I was at Page 2, and I went down to Atlanta and I did a 2-part piece about it, talking about how it was the greatest sports studio show of all time. That was the premise of the piece, because it was like finally there's a show that's like for us. Finally there's an unpredictable show that gets the conversation piece. But I think when people talk about what's going to happen in this show, you don't really hear a lot of dialogue about the history of how bad these shows were and what like we grew up with in the 70s and the 80s. And even like the most famous show is Brent Musburger and Phyllis George and Jimmy the Greek. Like, go back and watch that show on YouTube. It is absolutely brutal television. It's brutal, but it was great. We loved it. But you go through and like, how many ESPN studio shows have there been? How many countdowns has there been? There's been like 20. How many different football shows have we had year after year? And even the Fox show with all those guys, that's kind of like a karaoke show of the show that was pretty good 15 years ago. And Inside the NBA has been able to just levitate above it. And we've always been able to point to it and say, oh, this is the one. Thank God for this show. At least we have the show. This is the show that's figured it out. And I think Barkley's 85% of it, because he's the best TV talent we've ever had in sports. So wherever he goes, when you talk, Russillo, about the shiny new toy thing and is that worth it? What's the price? It is worth it if you're NBC. It is worth it if you're Amazon, because you have Barkley. You have this face you can put everywhere. You can trot out. It is like buying the biggest, shiniest yacht in St. Bart's. And I don't even know what he's going to get, but it's going to be some nuts number, I think. Because you get the legacy of, you're still basically getting the Inside the NBA because of him, right? Anyway, Russillo, any more on this?
No, I was kind of trying to find Inside the NBA ratings, and they're all over the place because it's the number right after the game is done. It's tied to the game.
Yeah, it's tied to the game.
Curtis, you have something on that?
Well, I was just going to say to Ryan's point earlier about the looseness. To me, the biggest thing, if it moves somewhere else, is it's got to go into the night. Like that's a huge part of Inside the NBA. Is that going to work on ESPN when they have to get to something else after game?
It's not going to work on NBC if they have to go to like
Jimmy Fallon.
News.
We got to go. Local news. So really, like to me,
they're tossing a Charmed.
Yeah, no, they would have to do it on Peacock, right? It would be like coming up next on Peacock. It's just different. Once you're making viewers work for any piece of what they're watching.
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't want to.
That's why Amazon probably makes the most sense.
This is where the Barkley number, you can't put a cap on it, because if there's one thing we've learned about content the last, I don't even think it's 5 years long. I think it's like a 3 to 4 year thing where the decision makers are like, all right, this person guarantees me an audience. Done. Like, whatever. And I think that clearly Barkley is on that short list. And it's not the play-by-play, because the play-by-play color numbers, very clear that ESPN was sick of not being able to figure it out. And then finally they're like, we'll just fix it with money and grab arguably the best team. And then Fox finds a way to, you want to talk about like salvaging things for a team that were losing all of its free agents. It's like, actually, you just drafted 2 future Hall of Famers in Olsen and Burkhart. And then the Olsen part of it, that's really weird. But Fox came out about as well as you could ever imagine post losing Buck and Aikman.
Yeah.
But I'm talking like because I've never really quite understood. Like, people bitch about the wrong play-by-play and color people, but I don't know that the ratings go up because you have the right broadcast team. I don't know that I would ever believe that.
No, the ratings are the same no matter who's announcing the fucking game. So we've been saying that forever. It's just a fact.
Barkley is on a really, really short list of people that I think would get people to go, well, what are they doing? And if it's something new, that number's astronomical. It's massive.
Can I make the case for Kenny Smith quickly?
No.
I actually think he's become underrated, and I think he's I like him and Barkley together. Like, if it was just Barkley moving on his own and saying goodbye to everybody else, and it's like, Barkley's going to be a new team, I would really miss what he had with Kenny, because I thought they really complimented each other. I thought they were getting real arguments on the air that were good-natured and always respectful. I thought he brought a different level of thinking to it, and I just... that would make me the saddest. Shaq, I like Shaq personally. I think the show would be fine with or without Shaq. You'd probably miss some of the comedy, but the Barkley-Kenny piece, I don't know. And maybe what would be weird is if Barkley went to one channel and Kenny went to another one, or Kenny and Shaq, or it got split up. I think that would be strange too. But
you're right about the Kenny part, like being the foil to Barkley. I think Shaq from the beginning to where he's at now is a massive improvement.
No, it's like a borderline miracle.
Right.
He was so bad that first year. It was.
I was like, why are you guys doing this? You already have what everybody considers the best show. Like, why would you do this? And I think it's worked because he and Chuck have a different dynamic that's totally different than the Kenny and Chuck dynamic. So that's one of those rare cases where it worked out. And like my issue with Draymond on it, what we talked about last week, and then kind of got picked up everywhere. It's like, you can't, trust me, as a young guy that was insecure about being on the air, and I'm surrounded by all these other stars and all these other big names and all the stuff that I was going through at the beginning of my career, I didn't want to be made fun of. I always wanted to be the cool guy. And what you learn is you can't be the fucking cool guy every single segment. You have to be a little vulnerable. You have to make fun of yourself. You have to be self-deprecating. And Draymond doesn't have any of those beats yet. He doesn't understand any of it. He's also, I would argue, one of the more delusional people that we have commenting on himself in sports today. So it wasn't even fair. Like, he wasn't ready to even sit there, but then he had to learn how to, like, hey man, you have to do, like, Chuck makes fun of himself all the time. Shaq learned, hey, I got to make fun of himself. Kenny's going to be made fun of because he's Kenny Smith sitting next to Shaq and Charles Barkley. And then Ernie has to be the rare anchor. Like, if you ever replaced Ernie, can you imagine how mad the new anchor would be and be like, hey, wait, you're just going to talk over me the whole time, blow up my clock, I've got somebody in my ear and I've got to toss, and now you're talking over me. You have no respect for me. Like, professionally, that's part of the joke, because they never have any respect for Ernie doing all the mechanics of driving a show. So to learn to do that on the fly immediately for a younger person in that role, that person would lose their mind. Be like, wait, this is what I have to do the whole time? So I'd hate to see it broken up. I just think the Barkley, hey, we've got Barkley. You roll him out to the upfronts. You're playing at Augusta with him with a couple vice presidents and programming, there's this other baked in vanity value, the word you used earlier, that happens with him that doesn't happen with many other people in the business.
No, it's like a Letterman's going to CBS type of situation where you're getting the show, but you're also getting this personality that now you get to put at the forefront of all these different things you're doing. You could argue that maybe TNT/HBO/Warner didn't leverage that quite enough. The Draymond thing's interesting though, Curtis, because on the one hand, I didn't think he was good on the show. I thought he was just too mean-spirited, and I just thought his usage rate was higher than it needed to be, considering he's walking on the show that's the best sports studio show of all time. But he's a young announcer. I'm sure he'd be better 5 years ago. The bigger issue to me is they just didn't need a fifth person. There was no reason to do it. And that was the part, when anyone who was critical of it, it more stemmed from why, which goes back to our initial conversation. Why? Why do you have to tinker with this? So when I look at Amazon and NBC as they put together their shows, I guess their thoughts are going to be more is more. Amazon did an NFL show. They had 5 people on it.
Yeah.
Why do you have 5 people on it? Why don't you have 4 and then rotate in a 5th person depending on what your specialty is, But I just know how this works. We're just in the more and more. How many people are on the NBC Sunday night show? What was that, 9? Let's go in the field to Jack Collinsworth and Rodney Harrison. Wait, what?
I don't know what the peak number. That was like a cap violation. There was a time where I think Dan and Olbermann were on it.
Yes.
Yeah, they had 2 studio hosts.
And Costas.
Yeah,
They were all
hosts.
3 on, I'm pretty sure, at the same time.
Yeah.
That would be an awesome piece, is to go back and just try to figure out how they actually split up the minutes with that. I mean, maybe it's a terrible piece, so I'm not trying to give you an awful assignment. But I remember at one point, because Bill's always really good in this, when it was the women's Final Four, it's like, oh, we got a 6-man desk or 6-woman desk. Actually, that's what I should say. So look out, hide the kids. NBC Sunday Night Football at its peak pushed the limits that man has never attempted to push since, because it was just, what the fuck are we doing?
Yeah, we're going to different sets. We're going on the field. We're back over here. CBS, when they were trying to work J.J. Watt in there, but they didn't want to get rid of Phil Simms, they were doing 6 at halftimes for, like the early games. 6 is just incredible to me, because there's always 5 people who just are never talking. I don't know if we're ever going to figure this out ever, Curtis. You've been writing about this ever since I've known you, and it feels like everyone's getting worse at it.
I had somebody from network tell me one time, we produce TV for ourselves rather than producing TV for people at home. And that's like, that note has always stuck with me. Wow. As a producer, that sounds like a cool idea. I remember as long as we're doing random 90s references here, I think it was the last year CBS at the NFL before they lost it. It was just Greg Gumbel and Terry Bradshaw in the studio. Yeah. And maybe Pat O'Brien and Leslie Visser were somewhere around, but it was kind of a 2-man show. And it was good. It was fine.
NBC did this with NBC. It was Costas and Pat Riley. It was the years between Showtime. He coached the Knicks. It was 1 year. And you can go back and watch some of those on YouTube. And they're like, it's like legit good. It's like, whoa, almost like a podcast. I do wonder,
okay, but wait, stay on this, because I'm thinking in my head the Rolodex of things that I loved. Like Baseball Tonight, peak Baseball Tonight in the 90s. I'm like, that's the studio show. That's the thing. And it's like your college girlfriend is over and she's like, do you want to have sex? You're like, no, Gammon's Diamond Notes are coming up next. Like I can't do this. But then I also think about the NBC weekend NBA package. And it's like, oh, wait, we're going to have Peter Vesey come out the side door and just blowtorch somebody right now? Like, this is awesome. Like, wait, I can't go anywhere. Peter Vesey's coming up. And it's kind of like the old Vegas line where when my friends complain about Vegas, saying that place sucks now, it's like, no, you're 30 years older than the first time that you went there. So you're different. It's not that Vegas has some changes and surely it evolves, but you're a lot different now than Vegas is. So are we sitting here complaining about these shows that it's really about us being a lot different, where we were so easily appeased with this stuff? I'm like, wait, Ravage has got the 10-inning game against the Blue Jays. Like, I can't, I already watched the game. I want to see the highlights again. I want to see Rob Nen strike out the side. Like, maybe we just all change and studios keep trying to fix these shows in a way that we don't care about anymore.
I'm still laughing at the Gammon's Diamond Notes thing. That's really, really funny.
I absolutely love Diamond Notes.
No, because
fucking
you know
Diamond
why?
Notes?
I loved it. I don't know what I was putting off for Diamond Notes.
I don't even care.
Yeah.
But here's the big point of all this, and it
Derek
connects.
Barton, what?
It connects inside the NBA everything. If you have 4, 5, 6 people on the studio show, you have to script things. You can't have a real conversation anymore. Everything becomes
that was
scripted.
The case 12 years ago, by the way.
Yeah. By the way, the more people on it, the more you script, and then all of a sudden it dies. It's not real conversation, and it sucks. That's what that is the point here.
Can I respond to the Russillo point? So technically, sometimes I think you're right, where we value this stuff because when we cared the most, it was the way they did it. So I'm always going to defend it. I just think the studio shows were way more important than the 90s because we had less sports, right? We like some cities didn't even have 24/7 sports radio stations at that point. We didn't have the internet yet. We didn't have podcasts to listen to. I just remember the 80s were even worse, but I remember just being so starved for any sort of info or conversation about things I cared about in sports that I would drive around in the 90s, listen to EI, and I fucking hated EI. I literally didn't like one of the shows and one of the hosts. And that's what I would listen to driving around because it was like, oh, at least they're talking about sports. I have other people in my life. So when I would watch like Baseball Tonight or like Riley with Costas, it was really meaningful. It was like, this is a half hour of sports that I'm just not getting enough of. It goes back to like when we did the National as the first piece we did for Grantland about the National trying to be this all sports newspaper, like how meaningful that was to all of us. Because it was like, holy shit, somebody's going to write about sports for 40 pages every day. This is amazing. Now it's like you can get anything you want. And I don't know where sports studio shows fit in there in the same way, which is what was so special about the Barkley thing. Because you still like the game would end and I always wanted to hear what he thought afterwards. And that's that's the rarest thing you have. First Take has some of that now with Stephen A. I can't wait to watch Stephen A. the next morning. It's 7 a.m. PT to hear what he said about the Cowboys. Like the shows that have succeeded and thrived, I think, have hit that the best. It's like, this happened. What do you think? Which we've tried to replicate with our pods too, I think.
We've already talked about, though, the ESPN, like the ESPN show should be better. It just should be better. But Stephen A. is going to do the Stephen A. role. Malika's a star, but she's the anchor. So she's still going to figure out a way to defer, because the job when you host is to defer. And Perk is feeling himself, but You never quite know. Like if he were tweeting during the Revolutionary War, it would depend on the battle. Be like, hey, this is a home game. Those boys got pride. And then, you'd have the deal going on Long Island, and it'd just be like the Hessians are in the mix. There ain't no way George
Paul
can
Revere's
get this done.
got to step up.
George was a stat. He's a compiler. No real battles, no rings. And then
could this be a segment? Perk breaks down random Revolutionary Wars.
Right. And then the French would get involved and be like, George and the Americans won the trade deadline. Like they added the French Navy. So ain't no way. So it just, there's that show I know it's not for me. And we've said this numerous times. So I'm arguing my own point of our standards in the 90s versus our standards today. And I agree with you, Bill. We just cared about it then because we didn't have that much content to get through. I never know what that show is every year. But they're also not allowed to have even close to the amount of real estate that TNT has. So it's not even, sometimes I don't even feel it's fair to be critical. When they come back from halftime, you can get mad about what it is at halftime, but you just go, you can't get mad about this.
The best way I would describe it is the way that how short the segments are would be like if they were being asked to play basketball without a 3-point line and TNT got a 3-point line.
And shoes.
That's the difference.
Mike and Mike had experimented with a side little deal where it was a couple chairs for like a longer form interview. That was weird, but the chair angle was brutal because it just led to an absolute dick bulge in chinos that was just right in your face.
Yeah.
There's nothing. It was like performance enhancing camera shot. And I remember the first time I filled in the side set and I like sat into it. I was like, whoa, dude. Like, we need to put up a parental warning on this. And some guy's like, he's got his headset on. He's like, we got bad chairs, man. We got bad chairs. We're trying to work through it.
Chairs are really important. The dick bulge
Especially,
set. Did they get rid of the dick bulge set?
Yeah, because there was no desk. You were just out there in the open, and the angle and the cinching of the pants and the entire thing. But, sex sells.
Curtis, anything else?
I always get unnerved when I see a sportscaster without a desk. I really do.
Yeah.
I don't like
it. Sportscasting is
I don't like it for talk shows or anything. Anytime it's just like the legs, it just feels, I don't know, I feel uneasy.
It just feels like a producer said, now let's stand up. Okay. Thanks.
That's so helpful. All right. Do we wrapping it up?
I think we got it. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Curtis, what do you got to plug?
Press Box Monday, David Shoemaker. And then I don't want to go all Pat Bev on you guys, but please subscribe to my podcast because Wednesday, if we pull it off, we're going to have a really cool NBA related podcast. It's going to be really, really fun. I just want to make sure it gets recorded and done and everything. There you go.
What's your finals prediction?
Mavs in 4.
Okay.
I love it.
So you do your finals prediction on your Tuesday pod?
Yeah, or Celtics in 7.
Oh, you already did it. I'm still sorting mine out. I want to know more KP.
Oh, really?
Info. Yeah.
Does FanDuel have any sort of line on what I think you're going to pick?
I'd probably pick Celtics in 6 right now, but can I see footage of Porzingis practicing? Would be great. Couple threes, maybe him running up and down the court. Would be nice.